In 1836, the city of Boston was not just a bustling hub of American life, it was at the edge of something even more unsettling, a strange medical mystery that would defy logic and stun the scientific community. It was a time when the world of medicine was still deeply rooted in superstition, and when human understanding of the body's inner workings was far from the sophisticated knowledge we take for granted today. Surgeons and doctors were still experimenting with anesthesia, and even the simplest operations were fraught with risk. Medical science was in its infancy, and for many, the mysteries of the human body seemed to be more closely aligned with the supernatural than with reason. It was within this world, filled with ignorance and wonder, that an inexplicable event would occur, an event that would shake the foundations of what doctors thought was possible. The story revolves around a young girl who had the strange and uncanny ability to react to a surgery before it even took place. She seemed to experience pain, discomfort, and a deep sense of dread before the first incision was ever made. To the doctors who attended her, it was an impossible occurrence, something that no amount of medical knowledge could explain. It left them stumped, their minds scrambling for answers, their understanding of the human body and its connection to the mind forever altered. Some believed that the girl might have been gifted with some sort of otherworldly ability, a connection to something beyond human comprehension. Others were skeptical, chalking it up to coincidence or some psychological anomaly. But none of the explanations truly satisfied, and the mystery endured. Imagine a time when the very idea of pain and the workings of the mind were still largely unknown. Surgeons often performed operations without the aid of anesthesia, forcing patients to endure agonizing procedures with only rudimentary methods to dull the pain. Even simple treatments were dangerous, and infection rates were high due to the lack of antiseptics. It was a time when many doctors still relied on theories like bloodletting and crude herbal remedies, and the concept of the mind's power over the body was far from understood. Theories of nervous energy or humors were far more common than any real medical explanation we would recognize today. It was a time ripe for superstition to flourish, where strange occurrences were often interpreted through the lens of mysticism and spiritualism. Into this world, a girl emerged whose experience of surgery seemed to transcend the known laws of nature. Her case wasn't just about reacting to surgery, it was about the future, a future that she seemed to be able to sense before it even unfolded. She had no prior knowledge of the procedure, and yet, as the date of her surgery approached, she began to display symptoms and reactions that were startlingly accurate. Her body seemed to react to something that hadn't yet happened, as if she was somehow in tune with the operating table, anticipating the pain and trauma of the surgical experience long before it was set to begin. Doctors who witnessed this strange phenomenon had no framework to understand what was happening. This wasn't something that could be explained away by the simple medical knowledge of the time. The girl's reactions didn't align with anything they had learned or were prepared to face. How could someone experience the pain of a surgery before it even occurred? Was it a mere coincidence, or was there something deeper, something darker at play? In a time when the unknowns of the human body were often explained by the supernatural, it wasn't long before others began to search for alternative explanations. Some speculated that it was a sign of clairvoyance or psychic ability, while others began to draw connections to spiritual forces. But for the doctors, who were tasked with understanding the workings of the body, this wasn't an easy pill to swallow. In the decades that followed, as medicine continued to advance and new technologies began to emerge, the incident would slowly be forgotten by many in the scientific community. The girl's story would be lost to the annals of time, overshadowed by the rapid developments of medical research and the increasing understanding of the brain and nervous system. But even today, centuries later, the case still serves as a poignant reminder of the mysteries that continue to lurk just beyond the edge of human knowledge. There are still questions that science cannot answer, still gaps in our understanding of the mind, the body, and the unseen forces that govern our reality. The girl's case is not just an isolated incident from the past. It is a window into the uncharted territories of the human experience, areas that modern science has yet to fully explore or explain. In this documentary, we will revisit the eerie and mysterious case of the girl who reacted to surgery before it happened. We will examine the historical context of the time, when medical science was still rudimentary, and we will explore the theories that emerged in an attempt to understand what occurred. Was it a premonition? A psychological anomaly? A glimpse into a world beyond what we can comprehend? We will also look at how modern science would approach the case today, asking whether the events of 1836 could still occur in an age of advanced medical technology. What makes this case so compelling is not just the event itself, but the lingering questions it leaves behind. Could it have been a unique phenomenon, a strange quirk of fate? Or was it something more? Something that defied the limits of the human mind and body? In the centuries since, science has progressed by leaps and bounds, yet there are still aspects of human consciousness and the mind that remain a mystery. In an era where we can transplant organs, perform complex surgeries, and even peer into the deepest corners of the human brain, there are still experiences that elude explanation. This case is one of them, a chilling reminder that even in our most advanced moments, there are still mysteries that refuse to be solved. As we uncover the details of this strange event and explore the medical, psychological, and even supernatural theories that emerged around it, we will begin to see just how little we truly know about the human body and mind. The girl's experience was more than just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the larger, deeper mysteries that have always surrounded us. We can only wonder how much more there is to discover, not just in the medical field, but in the realms of consciousness and perception. The story of this young girl from 1836 challenges our understanding of what is possible. It speaks to the mysteries that still linger on the edges of human knowledge, beckoning us to question, to explore, and to dig deeper into the unknown. As we delve into this story, we are reminded of the dark and unexplained forces that may be at work behind the veil of reality, forces that science has yet to fully comprehend. In the early 19th century, Boston was a city on the precipice of change, caught between the old world and the new. A city steeped in history, it had long been a hub of intellectual and scientific advancement, but it was also a place where the fog of superstition still hung heavily in the air. The streets bustled with traders and scholars, but the world outside the bustling port was still filled with mystery and uncertainty. At the time, medical science was far from the sophisticated discipline we know today. Surgeons, if they were to be called that, were more akin to butchers than healers. They were practicing under primitive conditions, using rudimentary tools and relying on crude methods to treat illnesses and injuries. There were no antiseptics, no modern antibiotics, and no knowledge of germs. An operation, even something as simple as removing a limb, was as much a gamble as it was a procedure. This was the world in which the strange events surrounding the young girl took place. In a time when medicine was still groping in the dark, when the human body was still an enigma, the possibility of a case like hers was almost unfathomable. Surgeons would perform operations with little more than a blunt knife, a steady hand, and the hope that their patient would survive. Most patients, even in the best of circumstances, would endure unimaginable pain, while the surgeons themselves often worked under the looming threat of infection and death. It was a world where the mysteries of the mind and body were seen through the lens of crude theories, humors, spirits, and the like, rather than the scientific methods that would later come to define medicine. In Boston, as in much of the world, the medical profession was still very much in its infancy. Surgeons had not yet discovered the power of anesthesia, and patients undergoing surgery would often experience excruciating pain, with little to no way of mitigating it. In the absence of effective painkillers, many patients were strapped down to the operating table, their screams filling the air as the surgeons did their best to cut, amputate, or stitch with minimal discomfort. It was an era where the mind and body were often seen as separate entities, and doctors had no way of understanding the profound ways in which they might influence one another. Yet, in this primitive and brutal environment, something strange and inexplicable would occur, an event that would forever change the way people viewed the connection between mind, body, and spirit. As the story of the girl's pre-surgical reaction spread throughout Boston, it caught the attention of doctors and medical practitioners who, at the time, were struggling to find answers to the many mysteries that surrounded the human body. They were fascinated by her strange ability to anticipate a surgery she had not yet undergone. How could a young girl, with no prior knowledge of the procedure, experience the same pain and discomfort that she would later feel on the operating table? It was a question that no one could answer, and one that baffled even the most seasoned physicians. In the absence of a clear explanation, the event stirred up theories that ranged from the scientific to the supernatural. Some saw it as evidence of a latent power within the human mind, something that science could not yet explain. Others, influenced by the era's fascination with spiritualism and the occult, viewed it as a manifestation of a connection to otherworldly forces. At the time, Boston was a city caught between the old world of superstition and the emerging world of science. The Industrial Revolution had brought with it new technological advances, and the world was on the cusp of great change. But the very nature of human consciousness and the workings of the body were still largely unknown. In fact, the study of the mind was still in its infancy, and many of the basic principles of neurology and psychology had yet to be discovered. The nervous system was largely a mystery, and the concept of how the brain controlled pain or anticipated future events was completely outside the realm of understanding. Medical practices were based on theories that had been passed down through the centuries. Bloodletting, for instance, was still widely practiced, despite its proven ineffectiveness, as it was believed to balance the body's humors. Surgeons used poultices, herbal remedies, and even the occasional leech to treat their patients. There were no X-rays, no MRIs, and no reliable diagnostic tests to help them understand what was happening inside a patient's body. Doctors were often reliant on their senses, using touch and sight to diagnose illnesses. The human body was viewed as a complex and mysterious machine, but it was still a machine with many moving parts that no one truly understood. It was against this backdrop of limited understanding that the events surrounding the girl's pre-surgical reactions took place. She seemed to sense something that no one could explain. How could she know, with such accuracy, what would happen to her on the operating table? Her reactions were so specific, pain, discomfort, and fear, that they mirrored the experiences of patients who had undergone similar procedures, despite the fact that she had no prior knowledge of them. There was no way she could have known what would happen, yet, in some strange way, she seemed to experience it before it even took place. The medical community of Boston at the time was a mix of skeptics and believers, but what united them all was a shared sense of wonder and confusion. They were fascinated by the girl's case, and many saw it as an opportunity to delve into the mysteries of the human mind and body. For some, it was a case of psychic ability, proof that the mind could transcend time and space. For others, it was a bizarre anomaly, one that could not be explained by the limited science of the time. Either way, the event left an indelible mark on the medical community, and for years, the girl's strange premonition remained a subject of discussion, debate, and investigation. Despite the fascination with her case, it was clear that the girl's experience was more than just a curiosity. It raised questions about the nature of consciousness, the ability of the human mind to tap into future events, and the way in which the body might react to something it had never experienced. Could the mind, in some inexplicable way, be connected to the future? Could it predict the trauma of an operation before the body had even been subjected to it? These were questions that had no answers, not in 1836, and not for many years to come. And yet, they would linger, unanswered and haunting, as the scientific community continued its slow and steady march toward greater understanding. For the girl, of course, there was no simple explanation. Her experience was not one of fantasy or illusion. It was real, and it was deeply unsettling. For her, it wasn't about the mysteries of science or the debates of the medical community. It was about what she had lived through. The pain, the dread, the anticipation, they were all real to her, and they made her question the nature of her own reality. Could it be that she was tapping into something beyond the physical world? Or was there a hidden power within her mind that could foresee the future? These questions would haunt her for the rest of her life, as they would haunt all who witnessed her strange and inexplicable experience. The young girl at the center of this extraordinary case was not unlike many others in 1836 Boston. Her life, though perhaps ordinary by some standards, would soon become the subject of an investigation that defied all logic. She was not from an aristocratic family, nor was she particularly well known in the city. Her parents were typical of the middle class, not possessing great wealth or social status, but rather living modestly in the heart of the city. They were well-meaning, simple folk who had no particular reason to believe their daughter would become the focal point of a medical mystery that would transcend time and place. However, in the weeks leading up to the surgery, strange occurrences would begin to shape the course of her life, and ultimately, the course of medical history. This girl, whose name was recorded only in passing and whose life has largely been forgotten, was described as a frail child, with a delicate constitution, perhaps more prone to illness than most of her peers. Her family had no history of any particular illnesses that could explain her extraordinary reactions, nor was there anything about her upbringing that would suggest she was predisposed to such an unusual experience. The family lived in a small house, probably one of the many brownstone buildings that lined the streets of Boston at the time, filled with the sounds of daily life, children playing, parents talking, the usual hum of a bustling household. Yet, within this seemingly normal setting, something completely beyond the ordinary was unfolding. As the story goes, the girl's condition required surgery, likely a procedure that, by modern standards, would have been considered relatively simple, but in 1836, it was a far more daunting proposition. The specifics of the surgery are unclear, but the description of her reactions suggested that it was likely an operation of some significance, perhaps something involving her internal organs or a deep-seated injury. Surgery was a risk in those days, often more dangerous than the conditions it was meant to treat. Infections were rampant, and anesthesia, while beginning to gain some recognition, was still in its infancy. Surgeons were not the well-trained professionals we think of today, but rather men who often had no formal medical education, relying on their own experiences and rudimentary techniques. What made this girl's case so disturbing, so perplexing, was not just that she reacted to the surgery, it was that she reacted before it even happened. Days before the operation, as her parents and the attending physician prepared for the procedure, the girl began to exhibit unusual behaviors. She expressed feelings of dread and terror, though there was no clear reason for such emotions. She spoke of pain and discomfort in places where the surgery would later take place, and her face contorted in fear at the mere thought of the operation, even though she had no prior knowledge of it. Her symptoms were specific and startlingly accurate. It was as if she could feel the operation, could sense the exact moments when the surgeon's knife would cut into her skin, despite the fact that no one had even performed a preoperative examination yet. Her family, of course, was deeply concerned. They had no understanding of what was happening, no way to explain their daughter's unusual reactions. At first, they may have thought it was a case of exaggerated anxiety, an overactive imagination perhaps, but the persistence of her symptoms and the precision with which she described the pain made this explanation seem less and less likely. As the days passed, the girl's symptoms became more pronounced. She would recoil at the idea of surgery, as if the thought alone caused her great discomfort. Her parents and the attending doctor tried to calm her, assuring her that the procedure would be necessary for her health, but their reassurances seemed to have no effect. She continued to react, her emotions increasingly erratic and her pain more vivid. The reactions were not just emotional but physical. The girl would complain of sharp pains in her abdomen, the area that would later be operated on, even though no incision had yet been made. She described sensations that mirrored the anticipated cuts, the pulling of skin, and the pressure of the surgeon's hands. Her family was bewildered, and the doctor, though at first skeptical, soon began to take her claims seriously. After all, what could explain such a detailed and specific reaction if not an unexplainable phenomenon? As the time of the surgery approached, the girl's reactions became even more intense. She would frequently burst into tears, crying out in agony, despite no visible injury. It was as though her body had already experienced the trauma, even though it had not yet been inflicted. She would often be found in a state of trembling fear, her small frame racked with the kind of spasms and discomfort that would be expected from someone undergoing a painful operation. Her parents, in their desperation, sought every explanation they could find. They consulted doctors, spiritualists, and anyone who might provide an answer to the mystery of their daughter's suffering. The family was caught between the competing forces of medical reasoning and the growing belief in spiritual explanations, both of which failed to offer any relief. It is important to remember that during this period, medical science was still in its early stages, and many practices we consider rudimentary today were widely accepted at the time. There was no way to examine a patient's internal condition beyond the most basic diagnostic techniques. Surgeons did not have the benefit of modern imaging technology or anesthesia, and many procedures were performed under primitive conditions. In some respects, medicine had made significant strides. Anesthesia was being used more frequently in Europe, and advances in surgery were beginning to take shape, but there was still much about the human body that was not understood. For the girl's parents, the prospect of their daughter undergoing surgery without any clear answers was terrifying. They were caught in the midst of a mystery that no one could explain, not even the doctor who was supposed to help them. It was clear that this wasn't just a case of fear or anxiety. There was something more happening, something that transcended the limits of their understanding. The young girl was reacting to something that had not yet happened. Her physical and emotional responses were not the result of imagination or nervousness. They were symptoms of something far stranger. As the date of the operation drew nearer, the girl's suffering only intensified. Her family, desperate for any form of relief, turned to the medical establishment, but none of the treatments they tried could ease her distress. They sought out other doctors in the city, but none could provide an explanation for what was occurring. The girl's condition seemed to defy reason, and as the time for surgery approached, her reactions grew more intense. In the end, it wasn't just the girl who was affected. The entire community, including the attending doctors and even some of the more skeptical members of the public, began to take notice. Word of her strange pre-surgical reactions spread throughout Boston, and soon her case became a topic of intense interest and speculation. The story of this young girl became not just a tale of medical mystery, but a reflection of the uncertainties that pervaded medical practice in the early 19th century. It was a time when the lines between science and superstition were still blurry, and when even the most experienced doctors were humbled by the limits of their knowledge. The girl's case would become a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that even in an era of scientific progress, there are still phenomena that cannot be explained by the tools of the time. As the date of the surgery grew nearer, the girl's condition continued to worsen. Her reactions were not just a matter of passing discomfort or anxiety, they were profound and visceral, as if her body was already undergoing the trauma it would face on the operating table. What made this case so confounding to the doctors and to her family was that the surgery itself had not yet taken place, and yet the girl's physical and emotional state mirrored what would occur during the procedure. It was as though she had already lived through the operation in some inexplicable way, experiencing every cut, every tug, and every sensation that the surgery would bring. To those who witnessed it, this wasn't just an unusual case of pre-surgical anxiety. It was a chilling phenomenon that seemed to defy all reason and explanation. At the core of the mystery was the fact that, despite her lack of knowledge of the surgical procedure, the girl reacted with startling accuracy to what would happen during the operation. She described the pain and sensations she would experience with incredible precision, even though she had not been told about the specifics of the surgery. How could a young child, who had no prior experience with surgery and no real understanding of what would happen, know these things in such vivid detail? Her descriptions were so specific that they could not be attributed to mere imagination or coincidental anxiety. It was as though she had already lived through the experience, as though her body had somehow tapped into the future and was reacting to it before it even occurred. Doctors, who were already mystified by the girl's condition, began to witness firsthand how her reactions corresponded with the planned procedure. One of the most chilling moments came when the girl, in an almost trance-like state, began to describe the exact point where the surgeon would make the incision. She could not have known where the surgery would take place, as no one had disclosed that information to her. Yet, she described the location of the cut with eerie accuracy, as though she had already felt the scalpel press into her skin. When the day of the surgery arrived, and the surgeon made his incision in the very spot the girl had described, it sent a shock through the medical community. The girl had not only predicted the surgery, she had physically and emotionally reacted to it before it even occurred. What made the situation even more unsettling was the emotional and physical distress that accompanied her predictions. As the girl spoke of the pain she would feel during the operation, she visibly winced, as though the sensations were already overwhelming her. She would clutch her stomach, curl into a fetal position, or gasp for air, as though she were already undergoing the very procedure she was about to face. Her body exhibited all the signs of someone in deep distress, despite the fact that nothing had yet happened to her. The distress was so intense that it seemed to transcend normal anxiety or fear. It was as though the girl's body was living in two realities at once, one where the surgery was still a future event, and another where it had already been carried out, leaving her to experience its aftereffects in real time. This created an atmosphere of deep uncertainty and fear, not only for the girl and her family but for the medical professionals involved in her care. The attending doctor, initially skeptical of the girl's symptoms, could no longer dismiss what he was witnessing. The girl's reactions were so specific, so consistent, that they seemed to demand an explanation that went beyond mere psychological distress. Could it be that the girl had somehow tapped into a deeper layer of consciousness, one that allowed her to experience future events? Was this some form of premonition, a glimpse into a future that had yet to unfold? Or was it something more sinister, a dark and unexplained phenomenon that challenged everything the doctors knew about the mind and body? As the day of the surgery arrived, the sense of unease deepened. The girl's pre-surgical reactions had become more intense and persistent. She continued to experience pain in the same areas that would be affected by the surgery, and her anxiety grew with each passing hour. Her body seemed to be reacting as though it were already under the knife, her heart racing, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. The doctors, in their attempts to calm her, began to wonder if she had somehow developed an ability to foresee the surgery in ways that were beyond the limits of the human mind. But this was not just an emotional or psychological reaction. This was physical, real, and frightening. The girl was experiencing the pain of surgery before it even took place. The surgeon, who had been preparing for the procedure, was now faced with the terrifying realization that he was part of something that couldn't be explained by conventional medical knowledge. He had performed countless surgeries before, each one carried out with the expectation that the patient's mind and body would respond in predictable ways. But this was different. This was an event that seemed to transcend the boundaries of time and space, a phenomenon that defied everything the surgeon thought he knew about human consciousness. How could this girl, with no prior knowledge of the procedure, experience the sensations of surgery before it happened? And why was she experiencing them so vividly, as though she were trapped in some kind of alternate reality where the surgery had already occurred? As the surgery drew closer, the tension in the room was palpable. The girl's family, who had been desperately seeking answers, now found themselves at the mercy of forces they could not understand. They had hoped that the surgery would bring relief, that it would cure their daughter's condition and restore some semblance of normalcy to their lives. But now, they were faced with the terrifying possibility that their daughter's experience was something far more profound and far more unsettling than they had ever imagined. What could this phenomenon mean for her future? What consequences would this strange ability have on her health, her mind, and her very existence? On the day of the operation, the surgeon and his team were forced to confront the reality of what they were about to undertake. The girl had already experienced the surgery in her mind and body. She had felt the pain, the fear, and the suffering that would come with it. The question now was whether the actual surgery would unfold as she had predicted. As the surgeon made the incision, the girl once again recoiled, her body racked with the same pain she had described in the days leading up to the procedure. The exact same sensations, the same movements, the same reactions. It was as though her body was reliving the surgery in real time, experiencing it as though it had already occurred. As the procedure continued, the doctors were left in stunned silence. How could this be happening? How could the girl be so intimately connected to a surgery that she had no prior knowledge of? It was an event that left the medical team grappling with questions they had no answers for, struggling to reconcile what they were witnessing with everything they thought they knew about the human body. The operation itself was performed without complication, but the true mystery lay not in the surgery, but in the girl's uncanny ability to react to it before it even happened. What did this mean for the future of medicine? Could there be something to this phenomenon that doctors simply could not explain? Was this a case of psychic ability, or was there some hidden force at work in the human mind that allowed the girl to experience future events? The answers, as it turned out, were elusive, and the mystery would remain unsolved for many years to come. But the impact of the event would echo through the medical community for decades, as doctors and scientists alike wrestled with the implications of what they had witnessed. In the end, the girl's case would become a dark and unexplainable chapter in the history of medicine, a reminder that there are still mysteries of the human experience that no one, no matter how advanced their knowledge, can truly understand. In the wake of the girl's unsettling pre-surgical reactions, the medical community found itself deeply divided. On one hand, there were those who saw her experience as an extraordinary anomaly, an event that might one day be explained by advances in medical science, but for now, was beyond the grasp of conventional understanding. On the other hand, there were doctors who were unwilling to entertain the possibility that such a phenomenon could be explained by anything other than some form of psychological distress, an overreaction of the mind to the impending surgery. The girl's case, far from providing a clear answer, opened a Pandora's box of questions about the relationship between the body, the mind, and the unknown forces that might govern them. The first instinct of many doctors was to try and explain the girl's symptoms through the lens of what was already known to them. In 1836, the science of the mind was still rudimentary at best. The idea that the mind could influence the body in profound ways was a relatively new concept, and psychological theories were still in their infancy. What doctors did know, however, was that the human body was capable of great physical responses to emotional states. The mind, they reasoned, had a powerful influence on the body, often manifesting itself in the form of anxiety, nervousness, or fear. But what they could not explain was how the girl's physical and emotional reactions were so specific and so accurate. How could she describe, in such detail, the pain she would feel during surgery, down to the exact spot where the incision would be made, without ever having been told? For many, this was not just a case of anxiety, it was something far more baffling. The attending physician, who had originally dismissed the girl's claims as mere imagination, was now forced to reconsider his stance. He had watched, in disbelief, as the girl reacted to the thought of surgery in ways that defied logic. She described sensations that she should not have known about, and her body responded to these imagined events as though they were real. For the doctor, who had seen countless patients undergoing similar surgeries, this case was unlike any he had ever encountered. There was no precedent for what was happening. No medical text, no theory, no amount of knowledge he possessed could explain what he was witnessing. And yet, there was no denying it. The girl's reactions were real. The pain she described, the fear she felt, and the distress she exhibited were all genuine, even if they were based on events that had not yet come to pass. As the doctor grappled with the mystery, he began to turn to the broader medical community for answers. He consulted with colleagues, many of whom had no better explanations to offer. They all acknowledged the strange nature of the girl's case, but most were quick to suggest that it was a psychological disorder, a case of what we would now call somatic symptom disorder, where psychological distress manifests as physical pain. This was not an uncommon explanation at the time. The idea that the mind could cause the body to experience pain, illness, or even paralysis was beginning to gain some traction in medical circles. But even as these doctors tried to apply psychological explanations to the case, they couldn't escape the fact that the girl's experiences were too specific, too detailed, and too consistent with what would happen during the surgery. Her premonitions of pain were not vague or general. They were precise, and they matched the surgery's timeline exactly. As more doctors weighed in, the debate over the nature of the girl's condition grew more heated. Some suggested that the girl was suffering from a particularly intense form of anxiety, perhaps even a form of hysteria that caused her mind to manifest the surgery before it happened. In the 19th century, hysteria was often used as a catch-all diagnosis for women's unexplained physical or emotional symptoms, and it wasn't uncommon for doctors to attribute strange, seemingly inexplicable behavior to this condition. Some suggested that the girl was subconsciously aware of the surgery and was reacting to it in a way that mirrored the trauma of the procedure. This theory, while plausible, still did not account for the fact that the girl had no conscious knowledge of the surgery's details. Others in the medical community, however, were less willing to dismiss the case so easily. They began to explore alternative explanations, including the possibility that the girl's experience was tied to some kind of deeper, more mysterious connection between the mind and body. Could it be that the human consciousness had access to some form of knowledge that transcended the limitations of time? Could the girl's mind, in some inexplicable way, have tapped into the future and experienced the surgery before it happened? This theory seemed far-fetched to many, but for some doctors, it was the only explanation that made sense. They began to consider the possibility that the mind, in its deepest recesses, might possess an ability to perceive future events, a kind of sixth sense or precognition that allowed the girl to feel the pain of the surgery before it occurred. While the medical community debated the girl's case, the public's reaction was just as divided. Some saw her reactions as a clear sign of something supernatural at work. Spiritualism was gaining popularity in the United States during this period, and many people were eager to find explanations for the unexplained in the realm of the mystical and the paranormal. To them, the girl's experience was not a medical mystery. It was proof of the existence of forces beyond human understanding. Some believed that the girl's mind had somehow connected with the spirit world, or that she had been granted a psychic ability that allowed her to foresee the surgery. Others speculated that the girl had some kind of spiritual gift, a heightened sensitivity to the world around her that allowed her to perceive events before they happened. In this context, her experience was viewed as a glimpse into the unknown, a sign that there were forces at work in the universe that could not be explained by science or reason. Despite the various theories that emerged, the fact remained that no one had a clear answer for what was happening. The girl's case was unique, and the medical community, struggling to comprehend her experience, was unable to offer any definitive explanation. Some doctors, frustrated by the lack of answers, turned to the emerging field of psychology for insight. They began to explore the possibility that the girl's reactions were linked to a form of unconscious awareness. Perhaps, they suggested, the girl had somehow picked up on subtle cues from the people around her, hints about the surgery, the details of the procedure, that her mind had absorbed without her conscious knowledge. In this way, her body could have been reacting to these subconscious impressions, triggering the sensations of pain and fear. But even this theory left many questions unanswered. How could the girl describe the exact location of the incision, the precise moment when the surgeon would begin the procedure, if she had no conscious knowledge of these things? Could the mind really be so attuned to the future that it could predict such specific events, even when the details had not been revealed? The more the doctors considered the case, the more they were forced to confront the limitations of their understanding. They were grappling with a phenomenon that did not fit neatly into any of the frameworks they had at their disposal. The girl's experience was not just a medical mystery, it was a challenge to the very way they understood the human mind and body. As the debate continued, the girl's case faded from the public eye, eventually becoming little more than a curious footnote in the history of medicine. While her story had captivated the public and the medical community alike, the lack of a clear explanation meant that it did not lead to any major breakthroughs in the field of psychology or neurology. Instead, It remained a mystery, one that offered more questions than answers and one that, despite its intrigue, did not result in a major shift in medical thinking. The girl's pre-surgical experience was a reminder that, even in an age of rapidly advancing knowledge, there are still phenomena that defy understanding, mysteries that science has yet to unravel. As time passed and the girl's case slipped further into the realm of medical legend, the questions it raised continued to resonate, leaving an indelible mark on the minds of those who had witnessed the events. The mystery of her pre-surgical reactions would never be fully explained, but it remained a touchstone for those who dared to question the limits of human perception, consciousness, and reality. Over the years, as new advancements in medical science took place, some of the theories surrounding her case would evolve, while others would fade into obscurity, leaving behind only the echo of an unsolved mystery that defied reason. By the mid-19th century, medical science had begun to make significant strides. Anesthesia, a revolutionary development, was gradually being refined, and surgeons were becoming more adept at performing operations with less risk to the patient. The practice of antisepsis, pioneered by figures like Joseph Lister, was slowly gaining traction, which dramatically reduced the incidence of infection during and after surgery. Medical professionals were also beginning to explore the field of psychology more rigorously, and the study of the mind was becoming an area of growing interest. Despite these advances, however, the girl's case remained unshakable in its mystery, standing as an outlier in a time of scientific progress. While the medical world had no shortage of new discoveries, it had not yet come to terms with the complexities of the human mind and body. Despite the progress in understanding how physical trauma and illness affected the body, the inner workings of consciousness, particularly the possibility of the mind having access to knowledge beyond the present moment, remained largely unexplored. The idea that the mind might somehow tap into the future, or experience events before they happened, seemed more like the stuff of science fiction than science fact. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with the advent of Freudian psychology and the exploration of the unconscious mind, that certain aspects of the girl's experience could begin to be framed in a way that was more aligned with modern theories of the mind. Sigmund Freud's work on the unconscious suggested that the human mind had layers beyond conscious awareness, hidden recesses where desires, fears, and memories could be stored and manifested in unexpected ways. Freud's theories about repression, dreams, and the psyche's ability to process trauma in non-rational ways provided some conceptual ground to explore what might have happened to the girl. Could her mind, in some way, have anticipated the surgery and manifested this anticipation in physical sensations? Could her body have somehow internalized the emotional and physical knowledge of the procedure before she had experienced it? Though Freud's theories did not align exactly with the specifics of the girl's case, they offered a starting point for future psychologists and physicians to investigate similar phenomena. By this point, the girl's story had faded from the collective memory of most, relegated to a curious tale told in medical circles or as part of folklore. Yet, the phenomenon she experienced, anticipation of future events in a visceral, physical way, would surface again, albeit in more modern contexts. As psychology and neurology advanced, the idea that the mind could somehow sense or react to future events began to attract more interest. The field of parapsychology, for instance, which dealt with phenomena beyond the physical realm, began to explore concepts like precognition, clairvoyance, and telepathy. These fields offered a more spiritual or paranormal explanation for the girl's experience, suggesting that there might be powers within the human mind that allowed individuals to perceive future events, or even connect with dimensions beyond time and space. The scientific community, however, remained skeptical of these claims, often dismissing them as pseudoscience or coincidence. As new technologies were developed, allowing doctors to study the brain in ways that were previously unimaginable, it became clear that the mind was more complex than anyone had previously thought. Functional MRI scans, for example, began to reveal how different areas of the brain lit up in response to various stimuli, and how the mind processed everything from pain to emotion. Still, the phenomenon of pre-surgical anticipation remained outside the bounds of established science. While science had come a long way, there were still mysteries that defied explanation, and the girl's case was one of them. Modern neuroscience, particularly in the fields of neuroplasticity and brain-body interaction, provides some insights that might have been useful in interpreting the girl's condition. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections in response to learning or experience, has shown that the mind can, in certain circumstances, influence the body in profound ways. This might explain how the girl's mind could have reacted physically to the imagined sensations of surgery. The idea that the brain could predict future experiences is still highly speculative, but neuroplasticity suggests that the body and mind are so intricately connected that one can sometimes influence the other in ways that are not fully understood. This could mean that the girl's experiences were, in some sense, the result of her mind's deep connection to her body, her nervous system responding as though the trauma of surgery had already taken place. Additionally, modern concepts in psychology, particularly the work of Carl Jung, have also shed light on the deeper, unconscious workings of the human mind. Jung's theories of the collective unconscious and archetypes suggest that there may be deeper, shared patterns of experience within the human psyche that are not tied to individual experience but to a broader, collective consciousness. While this does not directly address the girl's case, it opens the door to the possibility that there may be shared human experiences that transcend the individual. Could it be that the girl's experiences were tapping into a collective unconscious, one that allowed her to sense the future or at least predict the physical sensations she would experience in the coming days? While speculative, these kinds of psychological frameworks begin to hint at a deeper, more complex view of human consciousness that was not yet fully realized in the 19th century. For some, the girl's case remains a haunting mystery, one that speaks to the limitations of human knowledge, particularly in the realms of mind and body. While modern medicine has advanced far beyond the primitive practices of the 19th century, there are still areas where our understanding remains incomplete. The girl's experience, and others like it, continue to intrigue those who study the unknown, suggesting that there are forces at work within the human body and mind that cannot yet be explained. As the years went on, the case became a strange marker of the growing divide between the established scientific community and the realms of the unexplained. For some, the girl's case would always be seen through the lens of skepticism, a simple case of hysteria or anxiety blown out of proportion. For others, it would remain a glimpse into a realm of human consciousness that defies logic and explanation. Perhaps, in the end, the true mystery lies not in finding an answer, but in recognizing that there are experiences that transcend our current understanding, that there are forces at work within us, psychological, physical, and possibly even spiritual, that we are only beginning to grasp. In this way, the girl's story, her strange ability to experience future events before they occurred, remains a powerful reminder of the mysteries that still elude us. It serves as a marker of the limits of scientific understanding, and perhaps a clue to the vast, uncharted territories of the human experience that await discovery. As the years went by, the girl's case became less of a subject of active investigation and more of a historical curiosity, occasionally referenced in discussions about the strange and unexplained. For those who had witnessed her remarkable pre-surgical experience, however, the mystery remained unresolved, lingering in their minds like a question that had never been fully answered. The girl's life, once marked by the chilling premonition of pain and surgery, seemed to return to an eerie quiet, her strange abilities fading into the background of daily life, and ultimately, obscured by time. However, as the world of science and medicine progressed, new ways of understanding the human mind began to take root, and old theories that once seemed beyond comprehension were revisited with new insight. Though the medical professionals who had attended to the girl were no longer able to offer concrete explanations during their lifetimes, future generations of scientists, psychologists, and philosophers would begin to probe more deeply into the question of how the mind might anticipate events. Could it be possible for someone to sense an event that had yet to unfold? Were there deeper layers of human consciousness that modern science had only just begun to tap into? In the early 20th century, the growing field of psychology began to explore ideas about the unconscious mind and the power it had over conscious awareness. Sigmund Freud's pioneering work in the early 1900s introduced the concept of repressed memories and unconscious drives, challenging the prevailing view that the human mind was a purely rational entity. Freud's theories, though controversial, opened the door for further inquiry into the mind's potential to shape perceptions of reality. At the same time, Carl Jung's theories of the collective unconscious also began to gain traction, suggesting that there might be deeper, universal structures within the mind that connected individuals to shared human experiences. While neither of these theories directly explained the girl's case, they provided a framework for thinking about how the mind could process and even predict experiences outside of immediate consciousness. Jung's ideas about archetypes, symbols, and unconscious processes began to capture the imagination of psychologists and laypeople alike. He believed that the unconscious mind was not simply a repository of forgotten memories or desires, but a dynamic force that could influence behavior in unexpected ways. Perhaps, some speculated, the girl's reaction to the impending surgery was a product of an unconscious process, something buried deep within her psyche that allowed her to anticipate the trauma before it happened. This theory, while speculative, began to challenge the rigid boundaries between the conscious and unconscious mind and pose the possibility that the girl's mind was not just reacting to current events but accessing a deeper, more intuitive understanding of what was to come. In parallel with these psychological developments, the scientific community was also grappling with advances in neurology. By the mid-20th century, researchers began to explore the neural pathways that allowed the brain to process information about the body's sensory experiences. Neuroscientists like Wilder Penfield, known for his work with brain stimulation and mapping, showed how specific regions of the brain were activated in response to various sensory stimuli. These findings raised new questions about how the brain processed sensations and memories. Could it be that the girl's reactions were the result of an unexplained neural phenomenon, something akin to a vivid, subconscious memory or a deep instinctual response that was triggered before the actual surgery occurred? The growing study of neuroplasticity in the late 20th century added another layer to these theories. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections in response to experiences, suggested that the brain might be capable of adapting in ways that had once been thought impossible. This concept opened the door to the idea that the mind might have the power to experience future events, or at least anticipate them, through the complex interaction of neural networks. It also raised the question of whether the mind might somehow prepare the body for future events, even if those events had not yet taken place. Could the girl's physical and emotional responses be linked to a form of mental preparation or a heightened state of awareness of what was about to happen? Despite these advancements, no conclusive scientific explanation has ever emerged to fully clarify how the girl was able to experience future events with such detail and specificity. The idea of precognition or retrocognition, the ability to perceive or experience future or past events, remained on the fringes of scientific inquiry for much of the 20th century. While some researchers explored the phenomenon within the context of parapsychology, it was generally dismissed by the mainstream scientific community as pseudoscience. The skeptics argued that there was no reliable evidence to support the notion that the mind could truly access knowledge of future events. Despite this, the concept of precognition continued to intrigue both laypeople and researchers, sparking interest in the possibility that there might be mechanisms of consciousness that we simply do not yet understand. The girl's case, though largely forgotten by most, would occasionally resurface in discussions about unexplained human phenomena. She became part of a larger narrative in which human consciousness was seen as something far more mysterious and far-reaching than traditional science had previously assumed. While the medical community could not fully explain her experience, her story, much like other unexplained cases, challenged the assumptions of the time and suggested that there was much more to the mind than the material world could account for. In the end, the girl's experience became a symbol of the great unknowns that still haunt modern medicine and psychology. Despite all the advances in brain research, neurobiology, and psychological theory, there remain countless mysteries about how the mind works and how it might access experiences beyond the present moment. The girl's case is a reminder that, for all the progress science has made, there are still phenomena that elude our understanding, still questions that remain unanswered. Perhaps the most significant legacy of her story is the way it raises fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness itself. What does it mean to experience the future? How do our minds construct the reality we live in? And how are we connected to events yet to come? These are questions that continue to captivate not only scientists but also philosophers, artists, and spiritual thinkers who explore the boundaries between mind and matter. The girl's mysterious pre-surgical experience was not an isolated incident, nor was it the last time the medical community would be confronted with an unexplained phenomenon that challenged their understanding of the mind. In many ways, her case was a harbinger of the mysteries still to come, a testament to the fact that the human mind remains one of the greatest frontiers of exploration. For those who are willing to look beyond the limits of conventional science, the girl's story stands as a reminder that there is still much we do not know about the depths of human consciousness and the potential of the mind to reach beyond time and space. The girl's mysterious pre-surgical reactions continued to captivate the public and medical community long after her case faded from the headlines. While the exact details of her life after the surgery remain largely unknown, the questions raised by her experience did not disappear. Over time, her story was woven into the fabric of medical folklore, often referenced in discussions about the unexplained mysteries of the human mind. It became a touchstone for those interested in the intersection of psychology, medicine, and the paranormal, a case that transcended the rigid boundaries of traditional science and into the realm of speculation. Though the girl's case had never been fully explained, it contributed to a broader shift in how the mind and body were understood. Theories of the subconscious, precognition, and even the possibility of shared human experiences continued to evolve, shaping the way future generations would think about consciousness. The concept that the mind might possess hidden abilities, such as the capacity to perceive future events or anticipate physical sensations before they occurred, became more widely discussed, even if the majority of the scientific community still rejected it as unsubstantiated. As the decades passed, more and more stories began to emerge of people who had experienced similar phenomena, cases in which individuals seemed to react to events before they unfolded. These stories, some of which were catalogued by parapsychologists and researchers into the paranormal, sparked renewed interest in the girl's case. It seemed that her experience was not entirely unique. There were whispers of others who had predicted disasters, sensed the pain of a loved one, or even described in vivid detail events that would only later come to pass. These anecdotes, though not scientifically verifiable, presented a pattern of experiences that mirrored the girl's strange connection to future events, fueling the belief that the human mind might possess untapped, latent powers. The rise of modern neuroscience in the mid-20th century only deepened the mystery. As researchers began to understand more about the brain's functions, the concept of neuroplasticity took hold, suggesting that the brain could rewire itself in response to experiences. This idea, combined with the growing understanding of the body's complex network of neural and hormonal signals, began to push the boundaries of how the mind interacted with the body. Could it be that the girl's experiences were a result of an unknown, yet profoundly complex, interaction between her mind and her body? Perhaps, in some way, her mind had accessed a deep level of unconscious awareness, a level of perception that allowed her to anticipate what was to come. While the girl's case did not provide a concrete answer to these questions, it did contribute to an ongoing exploration of the limits of human perception. Scientists began to speculate that the brain might be capable of processing information outside of the normal boundaries of time, that some unexplained phenomena might be linked to cognitive processes that had yet to be discovered. Some even suggested that these abilities were not entirely outside the realm of possibility, that precognition, though unexplained, was a natural extension of human perception that could be honed with greater understanding of the brain's potential. Interestingly, the girl's case also sparked interest from those outside the medical and scientific communities. Spiritualists, mediums, and believers in the paranormal began to adopt her story as a part of their larger narrative about the existence of hidden, supernatural forces. Her ability to feel the surgery before it occurred became, to some, a proof of the existence of a higher spiritual consciousness or an unseen realm where time and space were not as rigidly structured as they appeared. For many in the spiritualist movement, her story was one more piece of evidence that the human mind had untapped spiritual potential. They believed that what had happened to her was not a simple medical anomaly, but rather a sign that the human soul was connected to a greater cosmic order, one that allowed individuals to perceive future events or gain insights that transcended the physical world. This blending of science and mysticism created a tension that would persist for decades. On one hand, there were those who argued that the girl's case should be treated as a medical mystery, an anomaly that could potentially be understood through further study of the brain and human perception. On the other hand, there were those who believed that her case represented a profound spiritual or supernatural event that defied rational explanation. This duality, science versus spirituality, remained a persistent theme in discussions about her story, and over time, it became clear that the mystery of her experience was not something that could be easily explained by either camp alone. In more recent years, as scientific advancements continue to shape our understanding of the human mind, there's been a renewed interest in phenomena like precognition and the ability to experience events before they happen. The rise of quantum mechanics and the growing understanding of how time and space can be altered at the subatomic level have led some theorists to speculate that time itself might not be as linear and fixed as we once believed. Could the mind, through some unknown mechanism, tap into a nonlinear experience of time? Could human consciousness somehow interact with the fabric of reality in ways that modern science has yet to comprehend? While the mainstream scientific community remains skeptical of such ideas, the fact that the girl's case continues to captivate and perplex researchers, psychologists, and philosophers suggests that the human mind still holds many secrets. Her case is a reminder that, for all the advances in technology and our understanding of the brain, there is still much about human consciousness that remains a mystery. Whether her experience was a unique anomaly or part of a broader, unexplained phenomenon, the questions it raised continue to spark debate and fuel the curiosity of those who seek to understand the true nature of human perception and the limits of the mind. As the girl's story drifts further into the past, her case remains a cornerstone in the exploration of the unknown boundaries of human experience. While we may never fully understand what happened to her, the mystery she left behind has opened a door to deeper questions about the mind, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. It is a case that defies simple answers, and perhaps that is what makes it so enduring. The girl's strange ability to perceive a future event before it occurred serves as a powerful reminder that even in an age of scientific progress, there are still forces at play in the human mind that we are only beginning to comprehend. In the decades following the girl's unusual pre-surgical experiences, the growing field of psychology and neuroscience continued to develop new ways of understanding the mind. Despite all the advancements in technology and brain research, the questions raised by her case remained largely unresolved. Even with cutting-edge techniques like brain imaging, functional MRIs, and the discovery of mirror neurons, those cells in the brain responsible for empathetic responses to others' actions, scientists still lacked a comprehensive theory to explain how someone could experience an event before it happened. The girl's case left an open wound in the fabric of medical science, one that continued to haunt researchers and thinkers long after her time. As new developments in neuroscience began to offer more insight into the brain's processes, the concept of the mind as a purely mechanical, linear entity began to evolve. The rise of quantum mechanics in the early 20th century, with its mind-bending principles about the nature of time, space, and energy, seemed to open a door into a realm of possibility. Quantum physics, which deals with the behavior of particles at subatomic levels, suggested that time might not be as immutable as it appeared. Instead, it hinted that the universe might operate on a much more complex, interconnected plane, one where past, present, and future could potentially intertwine in ways that defy ordinary logic. While quantum mechanics remained a largely abstract field of study for much of the 20th century, its principles inspired an entirely new line of thinking about consciousness. If particles could exist in multiple states at once, influencing one another across distances through quantum entanglement, could the human mind also tap into this interconnectedness? Could it be that the mind, in some profound way, could sense or even manipulate time and events beyond its direct experience? This theoretical possibility fascinated some physicists and neuroscientists, prompting them to explore the idea that human consciousness might not be bound by the strict confines of linear time. While these ideas may seem speculative, they were part of a growing body of thought that began to blur the lines between physics, psychology, and philosophy. The girl's case, with her seemingly precognitive reactions to the surgery, became a case study in the intersection of mind and reality. Some researchers in the emerging field of consciousness studies began to wonder if the girl's mind had somehow tapped into a quantum field of possibilities, an interconnected web of events and sensations, where time was not an absolute sequence, but something more fluid, more malleable. Could it be that she had experienced a kind of cognitive overlap, where her brain accessed information about the future? And if so, how was that possible? This blending of ideas from quantum physics and psychology eventually gave rise to new theories of consciousness, particularly in relation to the mind's ability to transcend the immediate moment. Some theorists began to explore the possibility of non-local consciousness, a concept that suggested the mind might not be confined to the brain or the body but could reach beyond these limits. Non-local consciousness posited that the human mind might have access to a broader field of knowledge or awareness, one that existed independently of the material world. If this theory were true, it would have profound implications for how we understand human perception and consciousness.